To the politics of the day, and we've got our panel this Monday and talking about the various information that we've been reporting via our political editor Andrew Clennell. Joining me today is Fiona Scott and Kerry-Anne Walsh, political commentator. Kerry-Anne, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Fiona in a moment. But to me, this latest revelation, reported by Andrew Clennell today here on Sky News, if there was any doubt that Bridget McKenzie was gone, this should end that. We've got whistleblowers coming out in granular detail talking about how this was done.
Absolutely. And why was there any doubt? I mean, the evidence about targeting particular seats was already there for everyone to see. I don't know what the political strategy behind hanging on to her is. I simply do not understand it. I presume the Prime Minister now has been forced into, well, he has been forced into, appointing these sort of, so-called independent investigations, but they're very narrow. They're exceptionally narrow. They're not looking at the overall administration of this program. They're not looking at the legalities around the Minister doling out this, taking it off Sports Australia and doling it out. There's a whole range of things that they should have looked at. Instead, he's defined it in a very narrow way for Phil Gagens, his former Chief of Staff, to look at.
We've got Fiona Scott with us, former Liberal MP. Fiona, this revelation by Andrew Clennell, or the series of revelations by him, shows that people were kicking up a stink within the office at the time, saying this does not pass the pub test.
Yeah, look, I think the stories that Andrew Clennell has got today are fantastic in regard to understanding the process in this space. But Kieran, I really look at this behaviour and I don't think it's unique to Bridget McKenzie. I think you look at various claims and rorts that the ANAO have uncovered over the years, things like the RDA 4 funding that happened under the former Labor government, of course, the Ros Kelly incident. And I think in some ways this new round of scandal that has been attributed to some of these political grants to shine a light on it. I mean, to hear today some of the leaks from some of Bridget's former staff saying that they felt it was wrong, I think it does really show what issues there are here and that really this just doesn't pass the pub test.
Fiona's 100% right on that. It's not like this is something which is new in terms of the scandal. I mean, you would recall the Ros Kelly whiteboard and so on. It's all
back in the 90s. Absolutely.
Both sides have done it.
I mean, it was always called pork barrelling. And the point is, the public no longer, and neither should we, put up with this sort of thing. It is disgraceful, as Zali Steggler said. We have become almost immune as a society to politicians looking after themselves ahead of the public good. And this is no longer acceptable. It stops now. And it must stop with Bridget McKenzie's head, and it must, the administration of programs like this, or if it's a regional jobs program or anything like that, anything involving a grant should be taken out of the hands of ministers. I mean, this sort of explanation that the minister must make the final decision is a political excuse.
Well, it actually gives the Prime Minister potentially, Fiona, a chance to come out on the front foot with some reform along the lines of what Kerry-Anne is saying and start the year as he wants to do, in control. He's got the press club speech on Wednesday. He doesn't want this unresolved, surely, by then. And as Kerry-Anne says, there's reform options available. He could do a very forceful response if they can resolve this.
Yeah, look, I think you're right there. I think there's a lot of conversations going into the press club this week from the Prime Minister that are going to be important. I mean, obviously, this has been a dreadful summer for so many reasons, and it's been dreadful not just for the loss of life, the loss of habitat, the loss of bushlands, but politically it's been a shocker for the Prime Minister as well. So to now have to go into the press club and sort these matters out is quite important. But I think there's also another sticky point in all of this, and I think, Kieran, that actually goes to the coalition agreement. I mean, you've got to remember that Bridget McKenzie is the Deputy Leader of the National Party, and you've been reporting for long enough from that building down there in Canberra to know how it goes over when a Liberal leader tells a National Party leader how to run their party, let alone a Liberal leader telling a National Party leader to sack a elected Deputy Leader that is elected by the National Party room. So That is the circumstances here. I'm sure if Bridget McKenzie was merely only a sports minister at the time that was a Liberal Party member, I'm sure she would have been sacked a week ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good point. The other complicating factor is here that the Prime Minister doesn't have a lot of senior women, and Bridget McKenzie is part of the leadership group, the Deputy Nationals leader. And if he does move, or Michael McCormack does move to sack or have her resign, she'll likely be replaced as Deputy Leader by David Littleproud or Darren Chester.
Yeah, I think there's a number of things there. One is that responsibility should be gender neutral. So if you are found to have acted inappropriately, it really shouldn't matter what your sex is and what the repercussions are. And the fact that that's going to shift a female out of a ministerial position, regrettable though that is. The second thing is that Michael McCormack has defended her to the hilt, so it's not going to be a good look for him to have to bow down. He also knows that there's a swirling cauldron of leadership ambitions breathing down his neck. Thus, he wants her there because he feels safe and comfortable with her in that position.
But it seems to me that they're waiting for this Gaetjens report, the Prime Minister's secretary, to allow due process, or at least perceived due process.
Yep, well, a sort of form of due process. I'm not casting aspersions on his integrity or character, but the terms of reference were incredibly narrow. It did not go at all to the administration of this program, which it should have. And the other thing is that, why didn't she step aside while this was being done?
Well, as Fiona has pointed out, you've got the difficulty of the National Party agreement. But Fiona, the Prime Minister is smart enough and experienced enough to know that when a minister is caught up in something like this, there is really no end to the information that will leak, will emerge. We've got whistleblower now speaking to our colleague Andrew about their concerns, which were raised at the time with the Chief of Staff, but rejected. I mean, it's laughable the way that some of the taxpayer money was spent. As you say, both sides have been guilty of it in the past, but this is the current story, this is the current criticism, and the PM would know that she's got to go. It's just a matter of trying to tick the box, I guess, of the Gaetjens report, saying due process has been followed, and to say you've had a fair chance. Please step down or you're going to be sacked.
Yeah, look, to my further point, Kieran, I mean, the Prime Minister has to be seen as the Liberal leader, that he has done the right due process to not be interfering with the National Party Room or the National Party Room's processes. So the Gaetjens report is a very smart move by Scott Morrison to show that this is a third-party audit. This is not a Liberal telling a National what to do. And I think that's one of the reasons Scott has to go down that process. But at the end of the day, I mean, the bleeding hair of the way Bridget is pulling this out, I mean, that also shows of self-interest. It shows, why is she doing that? Why is she falling that out? Is she going to, for instance, turn around and say, well, somebody told me to do this, or this came from somewhere else? And back to the comments that, with previous conversations you and Andrew Clennell have had at these desks in the last hour, I mean, I think there's implications where some of that may go further in the next few days.
When you look at Wednesday, I'll get both of you to respond to this, but I'll start, Fiona, with you in terms of, as a former Liberal MP, what do you think Scott Morrison needs to do on Wednesday to start this year on the front foot? Because, as you say, he's had various difficulties in recent weeks, not the least of which this terrible crisis that has had to be managed, the loss of life, wildlife and property.
Yeah, look, this is going to be a really challenging speech from the Prime Minister on Wednesday. It's going to be challenging for a number of reasons. And I think for him, he really does have to start from square one. He really has to look at what has happened in the news poll last week in regard to his own personal approval ratings and how he can start to win back some of the trust of Australians and him being the Prime Minister and them trusting him and moving forward. I think this speech is a really important set piece that sets up 2020 for him. I think looking down the barrel of later in the year when you hit things like summit season and the fact that even what we've just seen overseas with the World Economic Forum of having, behind people whilst they're giving addresses, the Australian wilderness burning and kangaroos jumping across. I don't think we can think as we go through the year that even the international pressure on us from a climate perspective is going to wane. And if the Prime Minister doesn't take a step in the ground, then I think there's going to be an issue for him that will lead on through the entire year. He needs to set his agenda. He needs to set the national agenda in regard to keeping people's power prices down, but also hitting our global targets. He can't be doing it with any of these offsets because he'll get smashed internationally for doing so. And of course, that will drive him down further. So this is going to be a really interesting speech, I think, and it'll be interesting by the nuances that he will need to do to bring the Australian community with them. And I think that is also to the point that where the Australian community was, say, in May in regard to power prices versus emissions and the environment, I believe there has been a change in sentiment in the average Australian or the quiet Australian, and let's see if Scott Morrison's tapped into that.
Okay, well, Fiona, I appreciate your time. Thank